This is Judge Joe Brown, and we're listening to We All Be News. News-free Dixie for the 21st century.
Welcome, family, to another wonderful edutainment edition of the Artivist Thinks. In this episode, I want to talk about the Ferguson situation. As everybody know, what happened last week in Ferguson, 2 police officers were shot and injured during a protest in front of the police headquarters in Ferguson. Now, allegedly, they caught the guy who did it, a suspect. They say he's 20 years old, but I think that suspect in itself, he don't look like he's 20 years old. But that's neither here nor there. But what I want to talk about is the interesting space we find ourselves in right now as a country. It was interesting to me that Barack Obama, President Barack Obama, and Attorney General Eric Holder had a statement on the cowardly acts of the person who shot at the police. They had that statement within 24 hours. Now you think about how President Obama has been hesitant to address the issues of police brutality, talking about young black men and women being shot or killed by the police. Seems like on a weekly basis, as we start noticing with Michael Brown, which happened August 9th, 2014. It's like it was a weekly occurrence, you know, of black folks getting mowed down or beat up by the police. And like some group said that every 28 hours a black person is killed by the police, which is probably, you know, people don't, oh, that's not believable. The reason why a lot of us don't believe that is because the Department of Justice for over 20 years have failed to keep proper, you know, track of those issues as it relates to police brutality. There was even an order by court to do so, but yet they did not do it for 20 plus years. So what I always tell people, I ask people, how can you expect the law officers to uphold the law, to even do law when they don't uphold the law? How you expect them to investigate themselves when they can't even police themselves? Okay, so that's what I'm saying. But also with the Ferguson thing, I think it's interesting. We look at the statement from the authority, the white power structure there, with the prosecutor Bob McCullough and the police guy, the head police cop, the top cop in that area, Belmar. They kept on trying to say that, you know, the person who shot the cops was a protester or protesters. Right? People have been saying the protesters have nothing to benefit or nothing to gain from shooting at cops while they're protesting. As a matter of fact, that could have been a justification for slaughtering protesters. The police could have said, you know what, they shot at us, let's just go shoot at everybody in the crowd. They could have basically, they're trying to validate if they did do that. If the police did use extrajudicial force, they could say, well, no, the protesters shot at us first, so we was in our right to defend ourselves. Now it's interesting that they could be in their rights to defend themselves when somebody shoot at them. But this past summer, you look at what's going on. I know President Obama was at Selma. I was down at Selma. I heard him down there for the Selma 50. He talking about what happened 50 years ago. But I could have sworn that Ferguson was Selma this past August. You know, I was there, tear gas, dogs and all this. And the report that came out from the Department of Justice, basically the whole city is a fugitive town. If you think about, you know, if you got 16,000 people in the town of 21,000, they got outstanding warrants, for their arrest. You got a town full of Billy the Kids and Jesse James and people like that, you know what I'm saying? But these are just regular folk. A lot of them don't have the means and the resources like a Robert Durst to buy a jury or to buy a top-notch defense team, a dream team, as you will. So you got all this going on, but Ferguson is not an isolated incident. You know, America is Ferguson, right? America is a plantation. America is a corporation. America is anything but a democracy. Okay, it's a republic. It's a corporation. It's a business. It's anything but a democracy. Because if it was a democracy, then everybody would have equal and fair access. And we all know that everybody do not have equal and fair access. But getting back what happened last week, it wasn't the protesters. It's like when they try to blame the protesters on burning down or burning up a church in Ferguson. Now, you know now you don't have to know too much about history to know that who has a track record of burning down churches, of shooting people at synagogues and temples and whatnot. Who has that track record? I mean, who blew up those 4 little girls in 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama back in 1963? Who was burning down all those churches in the 1990s? Those black churches. Who the FBI say were burning all those churches down? Who shot at the NACP headquarters, or not the excuse me, the NACP offices in Colorado? Okay, think about that. You know, even the worst black thug wouldn't burn down a church, let alone, you know, bomb it. You know, so we gotta start thinking more intelligent about what's going on here, and what is the real deal with Ferguson. So we all know now that George Soros put $33 million into Ferguson. Now, when I heard about that, it doesn't surprise me because of the type of people that came in to organize and whatnot, the type of organizations that were connected, and some of the folks that were able to come out of that, you know, and be labeled as leaders of this movement. It kind of reminds me of what Malcolm talked about in his, I want to say, the message to the grassroots. We talking about how the Big Six came to be. He called it the farce on Washington. Now, we know it as the March on Washington, the 1963 March on Washington, where Dr. King said his I Have a Dream speech. But Malcolm, in his speech called the Message to the Grassroots, he called it the farce on Washington. And also he talked about how it was financed by the Kennedy administration. How basically the Kennedy administration gave 6 black leaders or 6 black organizations money to control the Negroes in Washington, because their fear was that the March on Washington was going to turn out to be a revolution. And now, you know, you think about that, their fears were almost realized 5 years later with the Poor People's Campaign. Because, you know, we got to think about, we outstretched out in Vietnam, and Dr. King was talking about bringing all the poor people, black and white, Native American, whatever, no matter what you are, who you are, we all come to Washington, D.C. to shut it down. And so what they feared in 63 was about to become a fruition in 68, but they killed Dr. King. And we all know who they are, or they is, who killed Dr. King, okay? So they shut that down real quick 5 years after the March on Washington. But, you know, you think about the Big Six. Who were the Big Six? We had Dr. King of the SCLC. You had Whitney Young of the National Urban League. You had John Lewis of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. A.L.L. Randolph, all right? You know, A.L.L. Randolph, Pullman Car Porters fame, all that stuff. James Farmer, the president of CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality. And who was the 6th person? I'm trying to think. I'm sorry. Names escape me right now, but you get the idea. Basically, 6 black leaders, black male leaders of 6 black organizations. Okay, Roy Wilkins of the NACP, all right? You got 6 black leaders of 6 black organizations. Now, you know, people say, well, the NACP was founded by white people. Well, you know, they had black folks involved in the NACP that we know of. People like Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, people like Walter White, who looked white, people like Roy Wilkins. So we had black involvement in the NACP, even though it was founded by rich white people. Okay, so you got the Big Six right there. So the Kennedy administration wanted them to control the movement, you know. But like Malcolm, to paraphrase Malcolm, the Negro Revolution is controlled by the government, but the Black Revolution is controlled by God. See, the Selma thing, that wasn't LBJ, that was God, you know, because the thing about it is, white supremacy racism thrives off of divide and conquer. See, black people are a spiritual people. When we can come together on stuff, anytime you have 2 black folks agree upon anything, that's black power. Because black power is based on unity. You know, black people are the moral compass of this country. It's like Dr. King said about 50 years ago, it seems like we're integrating into a burning house as a people. See, there's a difference between integration and assimilation. We have not integrated as black people into the greater society, but a lot of us have assimilated, meaning that we have lost our knowledge of self, our true identity, and we have adopted to be like our oppressors and exploiters in this system of white supremacy racism. So that's something that people should think about. So we get back to Ferguson. Like I said, Malcolm talked about the Big Six that was financed by white liberal money via the Kennedy administration in the 60s. Fast forward to Ferguson 2014, we now found out that liberal billionaire George Soros spent allegedly $33 million in Ferguson to control and to promote whatever the agenda was down there. As we saw with the Department of Justice findings last week about, basically the city is under siege by white supremacy racism, but this is nothing new to the American experience and experiment. So we got to start being very critical of what's going on here. And like I said, I mentioned earlier about the Selma 50 thing. What was very interesting that, President Barack Obama, who spoke in Selma back in 2007 when he was running for president, when he was then Senator Barack Obama, he talked about how important the Selma movement was in securing black folks' rights to vote. My problem with the voting thing is this, every so often they have to vote on whether that we keep the voting rights or whatever. And now just recently, in the last several years while Barack Obama has been president, they are basically gutted some of the things in the Voting Rights Act. What made it such a powerful piece of legislation in the first place, they're actually getting rid of. You also look at the fact that there are a lot of black folks in jail who are getting out of prison, who have felonies and whatnot. They can't vote, but yet they pay taxes. And what I'm saying is this: it's kind of interesting. It seems like black folks' right to vote is kind of like comparable to renewing your driver's license every so often. It seems like having a driver's license is a privilege and not a right. So black folks' rights to vote are basically a privilege. And on top of that, what other group in this country had to endure that type of shame of having your rights reviewed every so often, even though you're supposed to be a citizen? Now I want people to understand this: there's no such thing as second-class citizenship. Let me repeat that: there is no such thing as second-class citizenship. But here lies the problem. Go back to George Carlin. This is an ownership society. If you don't own any assets or anything of that nature, your life doesn't mean anything. When people talk about having money, there's a lot of rich black people, but are there a lot of wealthy black people? I would say maybe there are some wealthy black people out there. You don't know their names a lot of times. They're not necessarily celebrities or entertainers. But here's the thing: what counts in this system of white supremacy racism is not money or dollars. It's assets. It's intellectual property. It's assets that can be transferred from generation to generations. Now, black folks in this system of white supremacy racism, we lack access. We lack access and also assets. We lack access to this system to get some type of leverage. We also lack assets that we could transfer from generation to generation. And you can also make the argument that we are not allowed to transfer assets from generation to generations. The reason why I say that, I'll give you a well-known example, which is the Tulsa, Oklahoma riots of 1921, Black Wall Street, and also you got in 1923, you got Rosewood. But one is not really cited that much, and I'll talk about it in a later episode, is the Wilmington Race Massacre and Riot of 1898. There's the Wilmington Race Massacre and Riot of 1898, which took place in Wilmington, North Carolina. Now, Wilmington, North Carolina is interesting for a couple of things. Two is the people that come from Wilmington, North Carolina. Wilmington, North Carolina is the birthplace of David Walker, who wrote one of the greatest pieces of literature known to man, which was the Appeal to the Colored Citizens of the World, which he wrote back in the 1820s. Really changed a lot of things, because soon after he wrote that, this is when you had the Nat Turner revolt in Virginia. Nat Turner led a revolt, killed almost 60 white people back in 1831. And David Walker wrote the Appeal back in the 1820s, but he's from Wilmington, North Carolina. And also a man by the name of Michael Jeffrey Jordan, known as MJ, arguably the greatest basketball player of all time. He comes from Wilmington, North Carolina. Now, what people don't understand is the fact that when we talk about Jim Crow and separate but equal, people think that was Plessy v. Ferguson, the ruling in the Supreme Court back in 1896. What actually enforced Jim Crow and separate but unequal was the Wilmington race riots of 1898 and massacre, where you had a town, Wilmington, North Carolina, that had a plethora of black businesses. You had black folks that own a lot of land down in Wilmington, North Carolina. And you had politicians, black and white, who were in power, who really favored black folks owning land and black folks doing good, being progressive. But the problem was the out of power white Democrats. I think they were the first incarnation of the Dixiecrats. These are the out of power white Democrats that overthrew the legitimate government of Wilmington, North Carolina. And the problem was, when they did this, they ran the white politicians out of office who were very sympathetic and empathetic to the black people cause. They ran the black folks out of town, so the black folks left behind businesses and land that was later claimed by the white power structure. Now here's the sad part. The governor of North Carolina knew about this, didn't do anything about it. The president of the United States knew about the Wilmington race riot and massacre, didn't do a damn thing about it. So this is what happened. This is why we had Jim Crow and separate but unequal and all that stuff in America, because black folks lacked ownership. When them black folks left North Carolina, all that land and those businesses and whatnot, and cattle and property, the white folks took it. The white power structure took it, and it became part of generational wealth. So the white folks who took all that, who stole that, who killed people for that, they was able to transfer the assets to their generation and to the next generation. Matter of fact, the state of North Carolina did a 6-year exhaustive study, which I believe ended in 2004, on the effects of the Wilmington race riot and massacre of 1898. So that needs to be looked at, because when we talk about a lot of things, see, the problem with us is black folks, we're such a spiritual people. We need to look at the politics of things. You know, like I said before, you cannot beg the devil for mercy. I repeat again, you cannot beg the devil for mercy. So with that said, I want black folks to really understand this system of white supremacy, racism. It's not about right or wrong. It's not about fairness. It's about ownership. That's how you get leverage in this system. You know, you look at them old mob gangster movies. You know how you get protection in a system like this? Everybody's paying off everybody. I'm not just talking about the store owners paying off the gangsters for a shakedown, but I'm also talking about the gangsters paying off the politicians, paying off the police for protection. See, in this game, if you don't have economic protection, then you shit out of luck, all right? You can have all the churches, you have all this belief in Jesus, but if you don't have protection of an economic nature in this system, then you are vulnerable to all types of this terrible things happening to you. And black folks have bear witness to all these horrible things throughout our generations here in North America. So I just want to tell you all about that. But how does it relate to Ferguson? Well, you come at the Ferguson and people talking about, well, you know, people need the right to vote. You come at the Selma, people need the right to vote. And I'm looking at Mississippi. Mississippi has more elected black officials than any state in the union. But you got a fairly large black prison population in Mississippi. Education situation has not improved for a lot of Mississippi black people as well around the country. But that's all another story. I'm just getting on to these tangents. But what I'm saying is Ferguson is not an anomaly. It's not something that's the exception. It is the rule. So, you know, you got Fergusons all around the country. And well, it is the Voting Rights Act if you must renew it ever so often to prove that you are a citizen. So black folks need to really think about, if I can't vote, how come I pay taxes? That's another thing we got to look at. So what happened last week in Ferguson, right? You know, you got Prosecutor Bob McCullough and the police chief guy, Belmar, referring to the protesters as being the one to initiate the violence. But the thing about it is, the real thugs, the real gangsters are protected by the system. Sometimes they wear badges, sometimes they wear suits, sometimes they have nice titles, sometimes they call themselves judges, sometimes they call themselves lawyers, or even police chiefs. So we've been known throughout our history. I'm not saying things that is out of order. Who were the people causing hell in Selma back in 1965, back in March of 1965? It was the governor of Alabama, George Wallace. It was the state troopers. It was the elected officials that was giving citizens hell. Who was the people that killed Jimmy Lee Jackson, who was trying to protect his mom and grandfather from getting beat up by some thugs with badges? It was a state trooper who's still around in Alabama who killed Jimmy Lee Jackson, who was trying to protect his mom and grandfather. So what I'm saying is, who are the biggest thugs? The one who sagged their pants or the one who wear badges? Now, I'm not saying that everybody who wear badges is a thug, but recognize the history. Who was the people that unleashed the water hoses on black men, women, and children in Birmingham in 1963? Who was Bull O'Connor? He was an elected official, right? He was the quote-unquote safety commissioner of Birmingham. So he was a thug with a badge. So we got to really understand what's going on. And I just want people to be aware of the situation. But with Ferguson, it's going to be interesting to see how everything plays out. Because really, short of economics, I don't see anything really changing. You know, I don't care if you get a black police chief in there. A majority black police force is not about the color of the skin. It's about the mentality. It's about the color of the mentality of the people who are supposedly serving and protecting the people. But once again, the people that really are being protected and served are not poor working class people or people of color. It's people that own stuff in this system. Those are the people that get the benefit of protection and of the service of the folks we think are supposed to protect and serve us. Some of us think that anyway. So I will have more later on, but I just want to give my quick thoughts about Ferguson. But I also would like to add that the person who was caught, the quote-unquote suspect in these shootings of the police officers, should get the same type of defense and the same type of financial support as Officer Darren Wilson. The reason why I say it is not because I agree, and I don't really know if he did or not. You can't trust the authorities. The authorities down there have shown themselves to be untrustworthy as it relates to justice and transparency, as it relates to serving and addresses the issues and the needs of the people. But what I'm saying is, the guy who was accused of shooting the cops, he might be innocent, he might be guilty, but he deserves to have the best defense possible in order to make the case. Either way, he deserved to have a Kickstarter campaign like they did for Darren Wilson. See, the thing about Darren Wilson is he had the police unions, he had all these folks. I think that white people, because they understand what's going on right now, because we had a war. The Civil War never officially ended. And really, the roots of the Civil War started in Missouri. You got Bleeding, Kansas, when folks went over there from Missouri and fought with John Brown and his people about the issue of slavery. You got Quantrill's Raiders, which introduced us to Jesse James. You had some black folks that fought with Jesse James for the Confederacy in Missouri, or whatever you want to call it. So what I'm saying is that in a white power system, the language they understand is money and military science, because everything with white supremacists is a war, whether it be a war like bombs exploding or it would be a cultural war, whatever it be. Everything they think about in war terms, because it's about survival with white supremacists. So I want to get people to understand that. So this guy, and it shows that we're not prepared as a people to deal with the actual harsh reality of the situation we found ourselves in as a whole, as well as the individuals. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in another episode. But this is my thoughts about Ferguson for the moment. But like I'm saying, the guy should, get some people raise money. I know we're so afraid, but really we're still the moral compass of the country. Black people are, because once we get unified behind anything, then when things start to begin to change. But the problem with us is that black folks, we create the blueprint for everybody else to follow, but then generation or two later we forget the blueprint that we created. See, we got to get back from not only being master teachers, but we also got to learn how to be master students too, and start, repeating this information, documenting this information, and sharing this information with the generation that comes after us. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about all these things in the Artivist Thinks episodes to follow. So thank y'all for listening. Subscribe to the blog, share this with your friends, keep on producing and pushing. And also know that in the words of the late great Duke Ellington, we love you all madly. Take care. God bless.